your martial arts movie podcast.
I threw that shit before I walked in the room.
Featuring drunken Thai boxer, Will.
Too bad you will die.
The also drunken wrestler, Mark.
I said I don't want trouble.
And drunken karate master, Zero.
You've lost your balls.
And now,
I know Kung Fu. You know, baby.
Fists of Fail.
Ooh, welcome back to Spooktober. Ooh, remember our failed episode last week? Ooh,
oh wait,
we're making up for it now.
Did you release that yet?
No, not yet.
God
not
damn
yet.
it.
Well, I mean, but by the time they listen to this,
right,
obviously they've been released.
I've been wanting to listen to that just because that was such a weird failed experiment on our end.
Yeah, but hey, today's not a failed experiment, right?
Well,
yes,
I would say slightly in a sense, because we are talking about a horror / martial arts / comedy movie. But I kind of think this movie is really lacking in the martial arts.
Okay. Yes, it is. It is. Well, it's not like Silent Rage, which is like a kung fu. It's a neo-noir science fiction. whatever that long genre is that movie was. This is a kung fu horror comedy, right? So yes, you said last in our Encounters with a Spooky Kind episode that it's very hard to blend three genres together, but I think that this one does it pretty effectively well. But yes, you are right. If there's any sort of compromise to be made there, it's in the kung fu aspect, right?
Yeah.
But it still constitutes as that.
Yeah, and we should just clarify, today we're talking about Mr. Vampire.
Mr. Vampire, Geung Si Xin Sang in Cantonese, which literally does translate to Mr. Vampire. I feel like a lot of times when you translate a foreign title to English, they always like have to tweak it around. It's like, that really long Thai title is gonna be Born to Fight now. Has nothing to do with that, but sure.
Yeah.
So Mr. Vampire is exactly what it sounds like, and I don't think you and I have watched or covered Mr. Vampire or Spooky's Encounters of the Spooky Kind before, so I'm glad that we're saving this one for the Halloween episode. But that was all incidental. That was not chosen by our choice.
Right. Yeah. If anything, I kept on thinking of Encounters of the Spooky Kind after watching this. This movie feels like what I wanted from Encounters of the Spooky Kind.
Right. Yeah, that's true. That is true. Well, I mean, it obviously the Encounters starred Sammo Hung, right? And this was like in 1980. Whereas Mr. Vampire was filmed in 1985, or at least in 1985, I mean. And Sammo took on the chair of just being producer, right? But obviously it was still kind of his brainchild in a way, because he's very much a horror fanatic, right? He has a little bit of that in him, and he wanted to bring that out into Hong Kong cinema, because that wasn't very popular at the time. Because the Chinese folks are super superstitious, and even as I was watching this movie with my father, Mr. Vampire, I mean, when
your father's Mr. Vampire?
No. Yeah, this will all make sense in a second.
Okay.
when I tell the whole story.
Sure.
When I was watching Mr. Vampire with my father, not that he turned into Mr. Vampire, when he saw the star of the movie, Lam Ching Ying, Ching Ying Lam, he was like, "Oh, that's Ching Ying Lam. He's this dude, he was in a lot of vampire movies, actually. And this was actually the movie that brought forth this whole craze of vampire movies in Hong Kong. And he would always play like that. I think Bey Logan said best, like the Peter Cushing kind of equivalent in Hong Kong movies, which is, he's like the go-to vampire exorcist.
Yeah, because of the success of this movie, he kind of got typecasted. So he just became Mr. Vampire forever. Right.
Well, Hong Kong culture is very different, because their film industry is like, typecastings still work. Who cares?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then my dad was like, "Oh, that's Ching Ying Lam. That dude, he always did vampire movies, so he was cursed because he died in 1997 from liver cancer, I think."
Yeah.
And he's like, "Well, that's not that he deserved it, but he's like, well, he was just asking for it because he did all these ghost movies.
Really?
So,
Wow.
Yeah, so I was like, whoa, that's the Chinese superstition that I was just bringing up before. But see, Bay Logan said it in his commentary for this movie, and it's very, very much is true. The Chinese folks are not only superstitious, but they don't see vampirism as like the way that we see it in the West, right? We none of us are like, oh my god, we need to buy a whole clove of garlic because Dracula's coming tonight.
Yeah.
The Chinese vampire myth is not really a myth. It's actually kind of tied in with Taoist Buddhist culture, and if you're in that household, you grew up with that kind of environment, you might believe in certain things that you'd see in the movie. So, hearkening to everything I was saying before, in the 80s, Hong Kong culture, like Hong Kong cinema didn't see a lot of horror movies like this. So, as dated as it might be for you and I, this might actually have terrified some people in Hong Kong.
I mean, one of the things I was going to say is I feel the movie kind of lacks in the horror elements. Maybe not elements. I feel that this movie is not very scary, although there are many horror elements in it. Okay, yeah, just to clarify.
Right. Okay.
This movie is so well lit. You can see everything. Like at least in Encounters of the Spooky Kind, there were very, very dark moments, and it created a lot of mood. There are so many night shots that are just everything is just so well lit. There's fires or there's the moonlight. It might have just taken place during the day. Like there's no difference almost.
That's true. I mean, at least Encounters, there are scenes where there's the monsters or the ghoulies they're in the dark, and you can't really actually make out a lot of their facial features. Mm-hmm. Whereas this movie, everything's super well lit.
Yeah, and then you can see the makeup, and I don't want to say it like detracts, but there's that notion when you make the horror movie, the less you can see, kind of the scarier it is, and then when you can see that it's clearly makeup, it kind of removes you from it. I mean, a little bit.
Right. Well. So is that 3 strikes and you're out? Because if the kung fu and the horror isn't really nailing it for you, what is the comedy for you?
Surprisingly, I kind of liked some of this comedy. Yeah. Okay. So where Encounters of the Spooky Kind, I did not care for any of that sort of funny business going on in that movie. Here, it worked for me, and I think because of some of the ridiculousness of the scenarios, we were kind of laughing, maybe unintentionally at times, but I think the comedy worked here a little better. I don't know. Yeah, something about it this film in general just worked a lot better for me than Encounters.
Yeah, for sure. I think a lot of it has to do with the setup, right? So the setup is Mr. Vampire, played by Lam Ching Ying. Very stoic man, like as he is in basically every movie he's ever been. And this actor is I think his best performance I've ever seen him in, and is the mentor character in Prodigal Son, right? Great role for him, where he's like the Wing Chun master. And he's in several movies that we actually covered before, in smaller roles. But outside of the Prodigal Son guy, he's mostly known for Mr. Vampire-like characters. But underneath him are 2 proteges or whatever I guess like apprentices.
Yeah, you can say. I would say apprentices.
Yeah. And one of them is played by Qing Xiu Ho. I might be mispronouncing his name. He is the brother of Qing Galok, who was the lead of Scorpion King. A movie that we covered before.
I see.
And he was also in Fist of Legend. He was like the rival character to Jet Li, if you remember this face. Anyways, so we have him and this other guy named Ricky Hui. And I think the reason why this movie works better is because of their dynamic, right? So Mr. Vampire is essentially the exorcist character, and these 2 apprentices both get into trouble. They either invite vampires into their lives by like fucking up with all these rituals, or getting lured in by a ghost succubus. Yeah, just
that
fucking
was
up.
my favorite. That's probably my favorite part of the movie, actually. And it's not even technically vampire related.
Yeah.
When that whole it's kind of a B plot, I guess you can say. Like
Yeah.
when that whole thing happens, I was just wondering, okay, so is the ghost going to team up with a vampire later? Is that kind of what they're implying? But it's actually just has nothing to do with it. It literally is just a B plot. It goes away, and then they're like, aha, now time for the final confrontation with the vampire.
Yeah, basically. Yeah. I mean, the vampire stuff is probably the most interesting. And then the vampire that they fight at the end, who's the final boss, I guess you can call it, kind of just goes away like a halfway point of the movie. And then we have like this, we really flesh out this ghost love story, which doesn't really add much to the main story. And it kind of shows because I think it, like, out of the whole movie took like half a year to a year to film. But the love scene, everything to do with the ghost, took only 2 weeks.
Really?
So I think that kind of shows. It's like,
Yeah,
oh,
but
just tack that on.
See, I like all the stuff with the ghosts, though. Even though, it's part of this vampire movie, I kind of wish it was its own separate thing. I think it's based off of like the fox, like a fox spirit.
Yeah.
A female comes back as a ghost, and she's luring men in to quote unquote love them to death. I think that's why I really liked it. I got really jealous. I was like, oh man, like I want some ghosts to just love me to death.
You want some ghost punani?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. It's weird because going with the vibe of the movie, you almost feel. I guess it's our Western viewpoint. Like, I feel bad for the ghost, but the movie, based off of the way that they're setting it up, it's like very unforgiving towards like how the ghost character is treated, right? Because like you almost want to side with her and be like, oh well, she's just looking for love, But in actuality, if you are to believe any sort of like the religious context, it's like, well, no. You do not side with her because she is a succubus. She is not actually looking for love. She is just there to entrap men. And I think that's kind of in line with some of the Sammo Hung-isms about like how he's deep rooted, has a misogyny in him. But yeah.
Well, it's kind of interesting though, because I feel that you do kind of feel bad for her in the end, because I guess the character who kind of falls under her entrapment, he doesn't kill her, kind of spoilers, but he eventually, lets her go. And I think that's supposed to help the audience sympathize with her. Like, oh, maybe it's not really her fault. It's just, she's a ghost. What else is she going to do? She's a horny ghost.
She is a horny ghost.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This movie is very sex positive.
In the 80s. Whoa. I don't know. I thought that was more along the lines of, oh, you're a ghost. Go away. Don't bother my friend anymore. And she fucks off. That's the way I looked at it.
I figured that if they were really being against the whole ghost thing, he would have just killed her.
Yeah.
Instead of letting her go.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. They didn't go that far. I think it's because it's the 80s and like, she's pretty. To leave her alone. So we have that, and meanwhile, the other character. I actually don't want to say what happens to the fate of the other character, not until a little later when we maybe break down the fights a little bit. But this will be your semi-spoiler warning, because what happens to the other character played by Ricky Hui is far more interesting, because that actually adds a little tension to the third act, I guess. Yeah. Because you're very intrigued, like, oh no, what's going to happen to him? So I guess the only other standouts I want to talk about are that the main villain, apparently, I can't get any sort of confirmation on this. Apparently in some scenes he's played by Yunhua. Yeah. But then other times, like, it doesn't, when I'm looking at him on screen, I'm like, that looks nothing like him.
Right. My understanding is that all of the acrobatics and action that the vampire does is supposed to be Yunhua.
Mm-hmm. But why didn't they just cast him for the whole thing? He's covered in makeup anyways.
Yeah. Well, I mean, he is an action performer. Maybe he was doing stuff elsewhere, and his schedule didn't free up. Yeah.
No, maybe. Yeah. I don't know. All right. So.
Oh, I want to point out that Moon Lee is in this movie.
Oh, yeah.
One of her, I guess, one of her earliest roles. And it is a non-martial arts role for her, which is kind of surprising because I know her mainly for, her
Ninja Terminators.
Exactly, yeah, like her kind of kick-ass action stuff. And
Right.
it was I remember seeing the name. I was like, oh, cool, Moon Lee's in it. And then as the movie went on, I was like, oh, she's not doing anything. She's just kind of there. But as I found out, this is one of her earlier roles before she got famous for doing martial arts. I was like, oh, okay, fine. She's the pretty face.
Yeah.
That's all.
Well, that's basically all she is. She isn't even a love interest.
Well, she is highly sought after from the the bumbling apprentices, but that all kind of falls apart in the end.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I don't know. That's really I guess that's only real standouts. Well, maybe we'll cover other people when we get really into it. So yeah, the first. I guess we're jumping into the action. The first real action scene, and this is what's going to be difficult about this, is with every other horror comedy kung fu movie that we're going to be covering, is especially with villains that are of the supernatural, overpowered kind, right? Like, how do you make choreography around that? And like you said before, it's much about like the living doing the ducking and evading while the vampires are doing a lot of the striking, right? But they're not striking; they're just kind of like advancing.
They're chasing. Yeah. So this one's going to be, at least for me, I think it might be a little bit difficult to break down because it's not choreography in the sense where people are doing hand-to-hand combat. Yep. There are moments of it, but it's choreography in that I need to get out of the way of these vampires that are trying to bite me. And they're kind of doing acrobatics around them. Mm-hmm. I guess that's like the best way I can describe it.
Yeah, right. Well, I guess once we, the first, well, let's just talk about the first setup, right? The setup is Ricky Huey is, well, you just call him by his character name, Man Choi. He's putting away doing all the incantations while there's a row of vampires in the background with talismans on their face. So they can't move, and that's part of the vampire lore. It's like if you have this talisman on their face, they're immobilized. But there's a lot of them, so it's obviously a little intimidating, right? But he seems calm enough. He's doing his incense, and then boom, like there's another vampire that just pops up out of nowhere and starts attacking him out of one of the coffins and chasing him all around. Turns out it's a prank by damn it, I just said his name, Jin Siu Ho. We'll just call him Cho. Okay, Cho. Apparently that's his
the
name.
character's
Cho.
name. Yeah,
let's go call it Cho. So Cho, plays a prank. He's like, oh well, that's just a prank, haha. But turns out the talismans have been completely removed from all the vampires, and now they're advancing on them. And this is where I guess the choreography, I guess, kind of ensues. Mm-hmm. It's really just like an excuse so we could see Lam Ching Ying Lam actually doing his thing.
So one of the things I wanted to talk about with this movie is I really like that they fleshed out the rules and the mythology more behind the jumping vampire. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to keep on comparing this to Encounters of Spooky Kind because we just watched it. But like, I feel with that movie, I didn't get a sense of the mythology. That was just a monster and it was there. Right. I like that he is like this priest exorcist, Lam Ching Ying's character, and they kind of show you the rules by just outright doing things. Like they don't say things a lot; they just do it, and you have to make a lot of inferring, like to just make the connections. There's this moment where Lam Ching Ying comes in, and he has I don't think it's an apprentice, just like another priest or exorcist, and they both bite the tips of their fingers to draw blood. And what you find out is as long as you put like a marker on their forehead or some sort of character on their forehead, that immobilizes the vampire. That was brand new to me. And I thought, oh, okay, great. That's a cool little rule that they're adding on.
Yes, but they never do it again.
Yes.
Why? Why is it only in this one scene?
They forgot.
I mean, they completely forgot. Yes.
Right. Well, the rule of having the paper with the characters on it, as long as that's attached to the forehead as well, that's still in play in this film, and that does come back later. but you're correct. We never see them bite their fingers again. And I mean, the wounds needed to heal. They did draw blood, so maybe that's why.
My question is like, what kind of razor sharp bottom teeth do they have that where they could just easily draw blood from a simple bite like that?
Right.
Whatever. You know what? I have a theory when it comes to Chinese vampires in media, because everything you just said is very true. Like you infer a lot based off of like what you see in this movie, and which is very true, is that from village to village, place to place in China, like the cultural inferences of vampires, like how they operate, are varied from place to place, right? So like one place's ideas of how they operate were completely different from another place. But this movie was so successful and that it was so popular that I think that a lot of the way that a lot of the mythology that got popularized in the world is from this movie, right? So like this is like a pioneer in many ways. This is the first of many movies that actually. What I'm saying is like a lot of the rules of the Chinese vampire come from this movie.
Oh, okay, that's cool.
Yeah, that's what I'm inferring. Because like now that we're talking about it, like I looked back in Encounters of Spooky Kind, like I don't recognize any of these rules.
Yeah,
these don't seem familiar to me.
Right. There were. I'm noticing some similarities. Like when the priests were fighting, they were doing the chicken sacrifice. They needed the blood and whatnot, and they had the wooden swords. But I feel that this movie was really like fleshing those things out a lot more. Yeah.
I would like to say that this movie has so much of the mythology done right that other movies just they just adapted it, and it became a standard of how we visualize like vampire media. All right, but let's actually talk about the actual fighting, or like at least the stunt work. At least there's really no fighting. They just kind of, I mean, that's
just sorry to interrupt, but yeah, it's there's a lot of stunt work on the part of the vampires in this scene, because Lam Ching Ying is trying to not really dispose of him. He's trying to, put him down. And it's kind of funny because it seems like he's really looking for a fight, and he's kind of beating up these vampires, as to where his, the other fellow priest is like, no, just put him down. Just put him down. And you get you get this great shot of him sending a vampire flying onto a table,
Oh yeah.
Nice stunt work. There's a funny moment where he kicks the vampire, and because the vampire has rigor mortis, he just kind of like plops over against the door. And because he has rigor mortis, he doesn't fall. He's just like this piece of wood that's against the door. And I don't know, I just thought that was funny. Like they were really adhering to the rules.
Yeah, right. It's like it had like a rubber band effect. That's what's really weird about it. Yeah, for sure. And that whole rigor mortis thing you were talking about, like I guess that explains why they just jump around. And again, maybe to our Western sentiments, it doesn't seem so scary. But that's not what we're actually gonna harp on. I guess the only thing I would harp on is how on earth are you gonna have choreography from a vampire if all they do is hop around?
Yeah.
And that's actually why we can just kind of move past this.
Yeah, it's a short introduction. It gives us a sense that Lam Ching Ying is he's the expert. He's been doing this. While his proteges or his apprentices were really just mucking things up and absolutely defenseless, he comes in really quickly and kind of freezes all the vampires again, and things are kind of back to the status quo.
Right. Well, I mean, after this scene, we don't really have a fight until much later on. I guess a little story to connect this fight to the next is there is a character played by Ha Huang who plays Mr. Yam, who was the adulterer character from Encounters of the Spooky Kind.
Oh, right.
I normally don't mention, I wouldn't mention a character like that or the performer at all, but the reason why I need to is because he is one of those guys that doesn't look like a martial artist. He just looks like, oh look, there's an old man. And then as we learn from Encounters, we're like, holy shit, this guy can fight. And so when I saw him in this movie, I'm like, oh, I can't wait to see his fight scene. Spoilers, he dies. And he becomes a vampire. And that is a setup for our fight scene, I guess, or his choreography. And what's I guess you can describe the premise of this fight.
Are we at the jail now? Are we at the prison?
I think we're basically already at the jail. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I mean,
we have to fast forward through a lot of plot.
Right. Yeah. I was just trying to figure out where we were now. But yeah, basically, Lam Ching Ying's character gets accused of murder because he knew all the details of the death. So they're like, oh, it must be you. Great police work. And so he kind of, he is sent to the jail where the body was also sent to. Right. The body is just lying there while he's kind of getting intimidated with torture. And he's locked up behind a jail cell, and his apprentice, Cho, comes in to break him out. And lo and behold, the body comes back to life. Yeah, right.
So yeah, like we have the two characters here, and then also we have that bumbling buffoon police officer character who comes into fray as well. Yeah, I mean, a lot of this is obviously playing up the comedy, and there's a little bit of tension. I wouldn't say that it's horror. Yes, there's like a supernatural creature in the room, but it starts to diffuse a lot of the horror when the comedy starts to ramp up.
Yeah.
Right.
Also, the setting. This is a very, very large, well spaced out prison. Like, there's nothing claustrophobic about it. Everything is just wide open, and there's fires and there's lights everywhere, so you can just see everything.
Yep.
If they just turned the lights off and just made it poorly lit, and then in the rack focus have the vampire rise from the background, just create some mood. Right. I think the only good like kind of scary moment comes when Cho's character is looking in the mirror. I don't know if you remember this. He's looking in he turns on the light and he realizes that he's looking in the mirror, and then the mirror comes down because it's kind of like it's on a hinge, and then you see the vampire behind it. I was like, oh, okay, that's a cool scare. There's no mood, there's no visual mood for me because everything is so well lit. But if there was going to be a scare, that would be the scare.
You know what the really impressive thing about that shot is, though, right?
What's that?
You can't see the camera.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Yeah, because he's looking at I can't even, how do you describe it? You see the mirror shot of him looking into the mirror.
It's over the shoulder.
Clear reflection. Yeah, over the shoulder. But once the mirror moves, you can clearly tell. It's not like, oh, they're faking that shot. So like, where's the cameraman? Yeah. Hey, it's a good shot. Like it's very interesting.
Yeah, I'm really curious now. I wonder, did they do it with two actors looking at each other?
Yeah. Well, you can't, because then the mirror actually slides down. So like, right. where would that be? Maybe when it slides down, you can actually see the cameraman.
Right.
Yeah. So the actual choreography here, there's dummies being used, which I like. There's that shot
when he throws them at the brick wall.
Yeah, that's great. I love it.
Yep. More dummies. Always use dummies.
Yeah. The first portion of it's pretty short-lived. What's his freaking name? Cho. Yeah, Cho gets on top of the top of the rafters, I guess, and does a backflip and puts a talisman on this dude's head. Before the buffoon comes back, the buffoon police officer comes back, and I will say, like, I can't, even though this character's kind of annoying at times, I think that the comedy elements, either because of him or surrounding him, do work to the movie's favor, right? Would you agree?
I wasn't crazy about his acting because, for me, his facial expressions, they were coming across as almost like he was mugging for the camera. He was his smile and his smirk were just a little too much. So personally, I didn't like it. Just not for me.
Okay, yeah. I mean, there's something funny about almost getting bitten in the nuts by a vampire. I don't know. I think that's hilarious.
Mm-hmm. Well, I meant more so his performance. Like, he's really kind of overdoing it. I mean, it makes for a good visual because, you can really see his facial expressions. But for me, it's just a little too much. I would have preferred if he toned that down.
Right. Yeah, so that's what I meant. Like, sometimes not so much the comedy that's spouted from him, but rather like the choreography surrounding him, right? So again, this is not really about the fighting, it's more like the actual choreography. Right. There's that element where the vampire is obviously chasing after this police officer while Cho is like throwing objects at him, and then like there's always just something that's causing this character to just get in the way, like getting hit by the barrel, sitting on the barrel, crushing his nuts so he gets branded in the chest. That's it's again playing up the comedy.
Yeah, they're playing up the fact that he's the buffoon. He's kind of useless. I like that he sits on the torture rack, causing him to fly in the air and then go nuts first into the face of the vampire. I was like, it's fun. A little silly, but that's fun.
Yeah, I mean, going with what you were saying before about the rules, just inferring the rules off of show don't tell. Once they did the stop breathing thing, like the vampire just immediately loses track of all of them, and I was like, oh, that's great. That's great rule establishment. I think that I forgot that was one of the rules of the Chinese vampires, but you were like, oh, I didn't know that they did that.
Yeah. And then it's one of those things. It literally comes out of nowhere because they say it real quickly, but it just establishes things, and it's like, oh, okay, this is a new rule. I'm fine with them doling out the rules of the mythology during like this fight scene almost, rather than them like maybe meeting beforehand and saying like, oh, by the way, don't breathe around vampires. It's kind of fun when it happens in the moment. I know some people would be like, oh, they should have established this earlier, but it's kind of fun that it's getting rolled out as we're actively experiencing it.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to describe it. You know what this reminds me of? It's a weird comparison. Is the T-Rex in Jurassic Park. I always felt like when they explain don't move. If you don't move, you won't see you. Apparently they do explain it much earlier in the movie, but it's just like so glanced over that I felt like when they actually showed it, it was like, where'd that come from? But like here, it's like, I don't mind it. It's like, but I guess for us, I guess it's a little. It might be a little jarring, but you still let it slide. Whereas maybe if if you believe these things, that you're like, oh yeah, of course, you don't breathe around vampires, obviously.
Well, now we know, and it's kind of fun because at first they're just kind of covering their nose, covering their mouth, and then later they kind of expand on different ways to breathe around the vampire or evade it. So I was like, oh, okay, it's evolving now. It's not just we can't breathe around them. They're coming up with new ways to make it interesting. So I appreciate that the movie's doing that.
Right. So we're talking about the next fight, which is the next scene after this, right?
Yeah. Well, I wanted to mention there's a few other things going on in this moment. Like I love it's a really simple stunt, but Lam Ching Ying's character has his head stuck between the bars, and in order to kind of scare him into getting out, Cho's character takes a wooden stool and is just gonna smash him over the head. And in order for him to pull out his, not get hit, he pulls out his head just in time before the wooden stool would have smacked him. And it hits against the bars. They do it in kind of a slow motion scene. I'm sure maybe it wasn't a real wooden stool, right?
I wouldn't put it past it. You know what I think it is? I think my bigger concern is whether or not those bars really were hard for him to fit his head through.
It was, I'm guessing his head wasn't really stuck, but I love that shot where you see him just pull his head out right as the stool would have hit, and it just it's very close. It just kind of reverberates against the bars. It's nice.
It would have been easier if he just pulled his pants down the second time, but it's not as impressive, obviously, on screen. Seeing that in the slow-mo.
Right, and we get more rules too, actually. So I got excited when Lam Ching Ying and his apprentice Cho, they start unraveling this black wire, and you see it visually go between like the vampire is in the background, the wire is in the foreground, and you see it literally kind of cutting him in half. And I thought we were gonna get
where there's got bifurcate the vampire, like cut him in half.
Yeah, I thought it was gonna cut him in two, and we were gonna get some crazy, top torso of the vampire, like crawling on the ground or flying all over the place. But unfortunately, that's not the case here.
Yeah, I this is the first time I've ever seen this in any media. Maybe it just this part of it never flew and got adapted into other movies. It's apparently some sort of blessed wire So yeah, like it gives us effect where like if a vampire touches a vampire or even the ghost, they just start flying back. They start exploding.
Right. Well, it's almost like the wire is has an electrical current in it, because once it touches the vampire, you do get the special effect of the fire on the clothing, which is nice. So they had to add that in there as well. But it also literally flings them back like a rubber band.
Right. Yeah.
But then Cho's character like leaps in the air and stabs him down with a wooden sword, and then they set the vampire on fire. It's great.
No, it's totally not a dummy.
Oh, but
well, I mean, at least they put the effort of actually making the dummy move.
Yes, I was gonna say I love that you see the arms flailing or the legs flailing. Yeah, it's a good
you
visual.
Can't see the wires.
He's just on fire. It's great.
Yeah. Hey guys, thanks for listening to the podcast. We're at the point where we give our recommendations, but there's a whole wealth of audio you would be listening to here if you follow us on Patreon. There you can listen to the entire episode, including an exclusive action breakdown of the fights in the movie. And now on to our final thoughts. Okay, so now we're in the next segment where we're, I guess, Moon Lee and Ricky Hui, Man Choi, they're in this manor and they're running away from the vampire. And I think you and I immediately drew the comparison to Halloween.
Yeah.
Like it was like the same exact setup.
Mm-hmm. Well, they hide inside the closet. The closet has kind of these blinds, and the blinds are casting a shadow, very similarly to when Jamie Lee Curtis is in her closet and Michael Myers is kind of like above her trying to get in, and she stabs him with the coat hanger. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Right, but this time obviously they're kind of tweaking it. So obviously there's a little bit of a horror element in it, but there's also implementing some of the comedy using the same rules that we established in the earlier scene, which is don't breathe. If you don't breathe around it, it can't spot you. So I think you were saying before that we set up this rule now. How can we use it creatively? So they take this giant bamboo staff and they start breathing into it to draw, breathing out into it to draw its attention away from where they actually are. It doesn't work entirely, but I thought that was really creative that they actually went ahead and thought of different ways to.
Well, it's fun.
So.
It's funny because they try it and it fails, and then out of nowhere, Man Choi's character sticks 2 Q-tips up the vampire's nose. It's a great subversion because you don't expect that at all, and that essentially blocks their breath, or the vampire from smelling their breath.
I love that. However,
it's reverse footage. It looks really silly.
Of course it is. I love that it's because it's funny. Obviously, it's ridiculous. But it just gets amped up another level because the vampire sneezes the Q-tips out.
Yeah.
What? Vampires don't... What? Why would they sneeze?
Who cares? It's fine. I guess we should mention, though, this is not the same vampire as the one we were previously talking about. This is... I guess this is essentially like the main boss vampire, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I guess he's like the final boss. He will be the final boss later. Now Cho and Lam Ching Ying come into the fray here. They come back and they try to help, obviously, to deal with the vampire and whatnot. So they set up a whole bunch of wires, and because apparently this is like a super vampire. It's not just like your ordinary run-of-the-mill one.
Well, this is a case where they really try to use martial arts, and it is really ineffective. You get shots of them trying to hit the vampire in the face, in the head. They try to sweep it, and it's like a dummy filled with cement or something because it's completely not moving at all. For lack of better words.
I love the dummy shot. There's a shot of Lam Ching Ying throwing a haymaker to hit the zombie in the head. The zombie's in the foreground, so Lam Ching Ying's all the way in the behind him. But it's clearly in the shot, and the dummy that they use, which actually takes the full hit of the blow, I think it's pretty convincing.
Yeah, it looks good.
It's obviously not the real actor, but it looks pretty good. I'd say. I mean, it's short.
There could be someone in there. I mean, knowing how they did stuff in Hong Kong, it could be a poor stuntman in there with just really heavy padding.
Maybe that's Yuen Wah again. Yeah, so they kind of defeat the vampire, but the vampire escapes because it's outmatched by the blessed wire it's being entangled in. And I don't really understand. Like, Man Choi, apparently, he obviously gets the vampirism, right? But he's not dead.
Right. Well, based on what would happen later in the movie when you see his wounds, the vampire grabbed him, and I think what they're implying is his nails penetrated the skin. And even though it's not a bite, I think the fact that his nails penetrated skin, the vampirism was still passed on to him.
Okay, I got that.
Yeah, because
okay, now I get
because
it.
we didn't see a bite, but I remember the wounds later are on his arms. So I was like, wait, when did he get hurt? I was like, oh, he grabs him by the arms. Okay.
Right. Now that's terrifying. You know what's even more terrifying? The next shot after this fight scene is how they're trying to cure him. So they are showing you all the remedies that they are devising to find the vampire cure. So we get a insert shot of them cutting up a snake.
Ooh, yeah.
Yeah, I was watching it with my dad. He's like, "Oh, that's the gallbladder.
Yeah.
That's like, yeah, that's the gallbladder. It's delicious." It's like, Dad, not the. Like that's, I mean, going with, you thought that the killing of the chicken in Encounters of the Spooky Kind was like pretty brutal. This goes on for a while. Like
it just holds on it, and you're just wondering what is happening here. Because he's digging the finger in there, and he pulls it out, and it's like, yeah.
There's a horror element in this epised,
right?
And we also get a chicken getting killed later in the movie.
Yes.
So we get it's like Encounters, but double the amount of animal cruelty. But I think the chicken's already dead, so maybe that's not so bad. Okay, so animal cruelty aside, we don't really have a fight until much later. The whole setup is now we got that whole love story with the ghosts. We have the Man Choi who's fighting vampirism. He's being told to constantly move his body so he doesn't develop that rigor mortis that we're talking about, which I thought was kind of funny, right? It's a silly setup.
It's silly. Well, the setup is funny. I think maybe I just wasn't really, his dance moves weren't making me laugh. Like I like the idea. It was like you have to keep the blood flowing or else the vampirism will come. So he's like, all right, well, I'll just start dancing.
Right. Yeah, well, that's the thing. I think the setup is the premise of it is funnier than the actual execution.
Yes.
That's fine. Okay, so let's talk about the love story with the ghost, because that is the backdrop of why we have our only real hand-to-hand combat fight between two mortals, non-vampire or ghost-related.
Yeah, I guess you're right. That is true. And it's still so short.
It is very short. So, yeah, Cho is possessed or enchanted by the ghost. So he doesn't see his master, who, his master comes into the equation to try to exorcise the ghost, but the ghost tricks Cho into making him see another, like, rapist character instead of the master.
The buffoon police officer from earlier.
Yes. Who's doing like these vile things, at least according to what Cho can see. So he's attacking his own master, unbeknownst to him. And that's the setup for why we have our only real fight scene of the movie with hand-to-hand combat. It's not the greatest, obviously, because, the premise is the master doesn't actually want to hurt his subordinate. He's only there to try to exorcise the demon or exorcise the ghost.
Right.
So it's more like one person's trying to do one thing while one other guy's trying to block him from doing it.
Right. And we have to keep on kind of cutting back to scenes of what Cho's character is seeing. Like, he's not seeing his master, he's seeing the police officer.
Right.
And he's doing, he's, like you said, he's doing the vile things. He's kind of antagonizing him, or it looks like he's sexually assaulting the ghost. So that has to give him that rage to then fight him.
Yeah. And see, that's the thing. It's again the only fight scene, but it's not. It's so story driven that, and there's a lot of those insert shots there that it's just like, yeah, I really wouldn't stay here just for the fight scene, right? Like like the choreography itself is not outstanding. It's more like funny because of how incidental it is, like the situation that they're in. But I mean, like we have that shot of Lam Ching Ying getting hit by that stool, which I thought was great because he just gets smashed by it and immediately just twirls to the ground.
Right. I think the best thing about this scene is something I probably don't want to spoil, though.
What's the part?
So before the ghost makes him see his master as somebody else, Lam Ching Ying and the ghost have a kind of a struggle, kind of a fight. And it is shocking what she does in order to try and, to try and fight him, to try and spook him, or the special effects and the makeup and everything that's going on. It's so fucking bizarre. I think it's great. So I kind of don't want to spoil it. I'll just say, like, when we were watching it, I was not expecting that. And I was just like, whoa, okay.
Yeah, I guess she got ahead of him. It'll make sense if you watch the movie. My jokes are so timely.
Yes.
Yeah, you know what? I guess without giving too much detail on it, yeah, it would be kind of a frightening imagery if the room wasn't so damn bright.
So well lit. Like, oh god, everything is so well lit in this movie.
I think that's the half measure that the Chinese audiences had to take. Like, well, we want to do a horror movie, but we can't make it too horrifying because we want to make sure that people can enjoy this movie. And outside of like the implied sexy sex scenes and whatnot in this movie, for the most part, I think this movie is actually relatively family friendly.
Minus all the sex stuff, yeah. And, I mean, there are moments of gore, but it's more like blood than actual gore. So it's not too bad.
Yeah. So like they don't want to make it too horrifying because again, the Chinese are very superstitious. So we have to take half measures when it comes to the horror stuff. So yes, if this wasn't so well lit, I mean, it still have all the comedy in it too. So I don't know. It feels like it'd still be a little bit of a clash in themes. I do like the finishing blow that Lam Ching Ying does to his subordinate, which is this flying leg lock.
Yes,
man, it's such a good move. He does it so effortlessly,
and then it's done.
and then it's done. The ghost leaves, and it's over.
Yep, she Superman's out the window.
So a chicken dies, and then we get our setup for our final fight, which I will say is pretty entertaining. Am I missing something?
Yeah, there is a rematch with the ghost, kind of. I don't know if you want to talk about that.
Well, that's the rematch is part of the final setup, right? So I guess that's kind of. Oh wait, you know what? No, it's not. It kind of blends all together.
Yeah. So basically, Cho is now tied up in order to prevent him from getting back together with a ghost, and Manchoi's character is partially succumbing to vampirism. So he is now attacking Cho, who is tied up. Meanwhile, Lam Ching Ying is outside trying to prevent the ghost from coming in. So you have these two opposing things happening. Like he doesn't know that the two apprentices are fighting. He's just outside, like trying to battle the ghost now. And there's a lot of fun special effects going on here.
Yeah,
I like that. Anytime the ghost touches something that is implied to hurt her, they kind of shoot like smoke out of it.
Yeah.
So, like they needed to do something. And you can see earlier they had they were doing special effects with like kind of drawing on the frames, kind of making it look like lasery with his sword. And I like here that they're doing it in camera. Like it could have just turned into like a Star Wars mess, but yeah, it's fun.
Yeah, well, like I think the stuff inside is actually a little. I mean, I do like the special effects that you're mentioning, the practical effects, but like inside is where a lot of the tension's being built, right? So it's Cho is trying to run away from Manchoi, and it basically turns into like almost like a Three Stooges kind of thing, where it's more played up for laughs. I wouldn't really call it choreography though. But obviously it's it's wildly entertaining because it just because of the scenario that he's in, because he's wrapped up around this pillar. And surprisingly, the ghost actually comes in and saves the day, kind of, or like protects him from the attack. And then the ghost. Well, they kind of corner the ghost and tell her to fuck off. And I'm not even fucking exaggerating. Like I think that's exactly what happens. It's like, go away. And that's it.
Yeah, that's about it. There's
with the love story.
It's so weird. Yeah, like everything with choreography is so short. There's this nice moment where the ghost is dragging Cho's character by the arm, and then Lam Ching Ying has Cho by the other hand, but he also has a sword, and he's just kind of swiping around them. He's swiping around Cho, trying to hit the ghost, but she's ducking and he's ducking, and there's like just really nice small bout of choreography. Like I wish that kind of stuff could just go longer, but this just isn't that type of movie. Yeah.
Well, yeah, definitely not. And I think, I would say the fight scenes don't overstay their welcome, especially for the supernatural fights, right? Because after a while, you just feel, oh, okay, I get it. Can't hurt this thing. How much choreography can you actually do around these vampires, and like that. So I thought that it's effective for what it is. And I guess kind of that will segue me into us into the final fight, right?
Yeah.
Or the final action set piece, which is they are now holed up inside this barn stable. I don't know, like this giant like building.
Yeah.
And they're trying to secure the place, but the vampire, which has now taken on its final form, has infiltrated the place and is trying to take out everybody one by one. Or I guess like take out everybody, not one by one.
Yeah. Oh man, when the vampire kicks in the door, I think they didn't judge how tall the door was, and then how tall those beams were that were supposedly, holding the door closed, because you see it like hit the actor, and then you see the camera shake. It almost seems like it wasn't intentional to do that.
Right. Oh man, I didn't even notice that until you just pointed that out. So now that they're inside, they're trying to avoid survive, I guess. I will say there's like small moments of like horror, but obviously they're immediately diffused with comedy, because like there's a moment when they go upstairs, they're trying to close the moonroof of the place, but then as they're climbing up to go close it, the vampire's like
he was already in the room.
Yeah. I was like, oh, okay, it's a good setup.
Yeah, that could have been like a great horror moment, but the thing is, the whole room is so well lit. So when he just rounds the corner, you're just like, oh, he's right there.
Right. Well, like, see, now this leads into an actual great stunt. So the vampire grabs Manchoy again, and I was thinking like, oh, he's gonna get vampirism again. What the fuck? Because he's grabbing him exactly where he would have dug his nails. But he just shoves him past a bunch of these wooden panels, and in the next shot, you see, I'm pretty sure this is a stunt person. You see this stunt person just plummeting down a flight, to the floor below, and he lands back first. And I'm glad that they have all this furniture in the way, obviously. Obscuring the shot of like him hitting the floor, because there's obviously padding there, but because of the furniture, it actually makes it look more painful than actually it probably was. Probably still painful though.
Right. Yeah. Well, what's great is he is being thrown through like a banister railing, and the wood kind of explodes. So you're getting this great visual of everything flying everywhere. Right. And then he lands on, I think he lands like on a table or something, and then all the stuff falls on top of him after he hits the floor. So it's a good distraction in that if there is padding, it's hiding it. But he still has to deal with all the shit like falling on top of him.
That's true. I've been curious since we started watching this, or I'm surprised we haven't covered it yet. I don't know how they do the effect of the vampires getting up so quickly, right?
What do you mean getting
So
up
like,
quickly?
so for example, in this fight, they get the blessed wire and they wrap it around the vampire and he flies backwards. And so you see in the next shot, the guy flies backwards, but immediately bounces back up. I don't know how they do that effect.
It's got to be wires, right? Because he is stiff when he gets back up. That's like the only way that they probably could have did it like that.
Right. It's probably wrapped around his waist or something like that. I don't know. There's something, obviously, it's meant to look unnatural, right? It's like he's meant to just be able to spring back up. But the way that it happens, like, I don't know how they physically made that performer do that. Like maybe it was like wires like wrapped around his waist that they just yanked it up as soon as he hit the floor.
Yeah, I think that's it. I think that's the only way. Yeah.
Yeah, but it just looks so like weird and uncanny because it doesn't look like, because like if you were to do that, wouldn't the cloth look like it's being tangled? I don't know. I've been very curious about this. Mm-hmm. That doesn't matter. None of that matters.
Well, I mean, you have these professional stuntmen doing it, so it could just be like, well, he took the pain and he got up really quickly.
But well, they're not bending their knees. So how are they getting up? Right. you see what I mean?
Springboard.
Sure.
Always a springboard. Yeah.
Okay, so if we're talking about like actual fighting, I guess is the most we actually get of like an attempt at like fisticuffs because Cho is trying to do choreography. He's like hitting the vampire in the face, kicking him in the face. And he's
just kind of getting thrown around at this point.
Yeah. Like none of it matters because it's just a tank.
Yeah, I love that the moment before this happens though, where the vampire throws like this kind of like big chunk of wood at him, and you see it hit like Lam Ching Ying like off the screen before Cho starts attacking him with those hits, and I was just like, oh, that looked really painful.
Right. Yeah. Man, I don't know. Like, what else is there with the choreography? I guess it's more about like the situation, right? So the situation is that they're running out of ways to deal with this thing because usually the vampires are stiff jumping ones, but because this one has reached its final form, it's far more mobile. So it's like actually running around the room and chasing them. And unfortunately, they run out of floss. So now they can't. They can't deal with him the same way anymore.
Well, they do have rice.
They have rice, yeah. We have this great shot of Cho, the performer. Oh my god, I keep getting his name. But whatever. The performer, he does an actual backflip off of the door, which I thought was great because there's no wire work that's actually being done there. And yeah, it's I don't know how many times I can say this. Like they avoid the vampire and they keep hitting it on the back and run away from it. It's just like a back and forth of this.
Yeah. Well, what I like here though is at least the actor who's playing Cho, he's doing like a lot of flips, and he, like you said, he does the backflip off the door, which is awesome. And then it turns into him now just throwing furniture at the vampire, and then also doing like front flips away. So it's not fight choreography, but there is the physical choreography of him doing these things, which is really fun.
Right. That this one great shot. This is very much like a Shaw Brothers kind of shot. It's probably the best portion of the choreography. It's so Cho jumps and grabs the banner, right, and then he hooks his legs onto the top banister as Lam Ching Ying is basically hurling his entire body at the vampire and basically pinning him down to the ground. So while Cho is up there inverted, he grabs two swords and tries to stab the vampire in the eyes. Yeah, this is all happening in one shot. It's very acrobatic. It's very impractical, but it's very much reminiscent of what you'd see in 70s era Shaw Brothers movies. It's very reminiscent of Crippled Avengers. They tried to do that with the last boss, where somebody jumps like on a banister above the boss, locks his legs in, and then turns his body upside down to kind of hold him from the top. Yeah.
where someone was like attacking from the bottom, and that's what I was seeing here. As where in this movie, Cho's character, he has the two swords or the two swords, and he stabs downwards, and it just is completely ineffective.
Right.
It's a shame. Like, I wish that got drawn out just a little more because it happened so quick. I didn't even realize what he's trying to do.
Right. Well, the choreography kind of, I mean, that's like the highlight there, right? I think it never really gets as good as that, really. But I don't think that the whole action scene loses momentum, because at least once they open the front door, they run outside, you see the row of vampires again, right? From the very beginning of the movie. And we're like, and then when we see that the person, the other priest, there you go, the other priest who we didn't mention at all in the movie, he commands them to attack the main bad guy. We're like, oh, this is a great setup. We're gonna see a vampire versus vampire fight. That sounds awesome. And it doesn't really get fleshed out much.
It doesn't get fleshed out at all, man. Like, when that was such an awesome surprise when you open the door and you see the vampires from the beginning. I was like, oh shit, it's gonna be like a 12-on-1 fight. And unfortunately, our main vampire bad guy is just too overpowered and just he blasts them all away. It's a little anticlimactic.
Yeah, well, they don't really do much with this. Now it just becomes more about brute force, trying to hold the vampire down, and I think they introduced the rule that's a little too late, which is like, if you kiss the vampire, you can suck out its breath. I've heard that one before.
Was it through a kiss? I thought it was supposed to be you literally have to suck out his breath.
Yeah, I don't know that.
I don't know the exact specifications of it.
Right.
I thought they had to suck out his breath, but it just kind of looks like they're trying to kiss him.
Yeah.
So it's very, very silly.
Right. I mean, yeah, it's weird because like now that we're actually holding the vampire down, the camera's lingering on it, you can see it's totally a mask.
Oh, of course. And it's so well lit. This freaking set is just way too well lit.
Yeah. Well, they don't use the whole suck out its breath thing at all. They just like, oh, here's like a moment for comedy, but they don't actually go with it. Moon Lee tries
kiss him, but then he just kind of deflects them all away.
Yeah.
And I think what happened is Cho's character takes a giant log and literally hits him over the chest, and you can see like it looks like poof comes out of his mouth. So I think that's what they were implying, that was his breath now finally leaving his body, and now he's susceptible to being set on fire.
Well, I mean, I think he would have died from being set on fire anyways, because I think the rule was set that vampires are susceptible to fire.
Yeah, but they didn't really establish that too well, so that was a little disappointing.
I just thought the whole breath sucking out thing was like that was so pointless. Doesn't matter because it's so short. What matters is the final stunt, which is Yunhua in vampire garb gets lit on fire.
Oh my god, it's pretty crazy. The stunt isn't as insane as the Encounters of the Spooky Kind stunt, where you have the stuntman on fire falling off of this really, really high platform onto the ground. But the crazy thing is Cho's character takes like a jug full of flammable oil and tosses it on the ground, igniting it even more. And you just see these slow motion shots of the poor guy on fire, kind of rolling around.
And this is all happening indoors.
Yeah.
It's something more terrifying
on this wood-built set.
Yeah. I know that some of the some of the sets in this movie are the same sets that they used in Fist of Fury, or the one with Bruce Lee. I don't think it's this one, and I would imagine that they wouldn't want to do it in that one because that's like a legendary set. You don't fuck up with that set. Mm-hmm. But it's a crazy stunt. It's like because you know how Hong Kong movies are. They let in Hollywood they're like, oh well, the stuntman's on fire and cut. Okay, now we extinguish him. In a Hong Kong movie, it would be like, all right, the guy's on fire. Just let him burn.
They go on their lunch break.
Yeah. It's like the cameras keep rolling. It's a crazy stunt. it's an awesome shot of like everything just like being lit ablaze, and then the movie ends.
Yeah.
And that's Mr. Vampire.
That's Mr. Vampire. Yes, we get your typical freeze frame.
Yep.
But I wish it stuck on the freeze frame, because I didn't even get that the movie was over, because you get that freeze frame after after the other priest trips, but then it immediately goes into credits and then footage from the movie.
Yep.
So there's kind of a disconnect. Like I prefer the freeze frame and just kind of stick with it.
Yeah. I know at the time this was popular. They're like, well, let's either recap the movie. They probably didn't have any footage that was good for like outtakes. It doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter. Like, they just call it an end, because that was Mr. Vampire, and this is really weird for us to keep doing horror kung fu comedies.
Right.
Because it's very, because I feel like the consensus will always be like, oh, the kung fu is always going to take a hit because of everything else.
I think it just happened that the movies we chose just don't have good kung fu in them. Well, this one barely has any martial arts in it, but we decided to still talk about it. I think it was still fun to watch because we just saw Encounters of the Spooky Kind, and this feels like Succession. This feels like naturally would have come next in making a horror martial arts film.
Yeah. I think this movie's important because it definitely, I can see how it paved the way for a lot of future vampire movies, vampire kung fu movies. Well, maybe not kung fu, but just vampire movies in general. I thought this was a pretty good, decent film. I think both and I. Well, I can't speak for you, but I definitely had a good time watching it. I thought it was I liked Encounters in a way. Like, I definitely have admiration for it. I liked it enough. But I think overall, this movie's far more entertaining.
Oh yeah, I would highly agree with you there. I mean, I mentioned in the Encounters episode, the movie was a little bit of a chore to get through, and I just wasn't digging the genre mashups and how Sammo brought it all together. Yep. In this, like, while I felt many aspects of each genre were lacking, I think the movie as a whole was just so much more entertaining to me.
Yeah. I think it does. Like you said, it's a natural progression from what Encounters did, and I think it's definitely a good, entertaining film all in all. I think you can definitely put this on. I don't think it excels in any particular area. It's not scary. It's not like the comedy is just it's good. It's not amazing. It's not laugh out loud hilarious. It's good. And I mean, this kind of goes along with the whole martial arts recommendation thing. I don't think the martial arts in this is so good, or like it's not. It obviously has to take a hit because of the supernatural elements in it. So I definitely don't think you should watch the fight scenes without the movie. Definitely watch the movie because the fight scenes themselves they're not all that entertaining without context. And I think this movie is obviously very much contextual when it comes to the action. But I do recommend the movie. I think because like it just, for me, it combines all three of those things just well enough into one cohesive thing that's like, okay, I think this is a overall good time to be had. And I don't know, maybe I don't know, maybe you agree, maybe you don't.
No, I completely agree. That's about it. Yeah, like it's just kind of it's weird. It's lacking in everything from the genre, but the movie as a whole, I really liked it. I was very entertained. I liked all the new rules I got to see from Chinese vampire mythology. And yeah, it was good. Just a pretty high recommend if you were looking for a Chinese horror film. Even though it's not really scary and there's not really any martial arts, and I don't really like a lot of the comedy, but it's weird. The movie as a whole, I still dug it. Yeah, right. So I recommend the movie.
Yeah, definitely. Man, can you believe that this movie actually got award, like nominated for Best Action for that year, 1985?
Really?
Yeah. It's not surprising. It lost to Project A. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you remember hearing that too. I don't know. I was like, was Project A that great either? Like,
yeah, well, I mean, Project A had the the infamous awning stunt from Jackie.
Wasn't Police Story the same year?
As 85?
I think so.
I don't know.
I don't know. I might be wrong, but if it's true, that's a travesty. No, it's 85. What the fuck? It isn't.
Well, I mean, I don't know. We'll have to go back and just see what it was compared to. But
this is unacceptable.
I'm not surprised that this movie lost to Project A in terms of action. Like it's not really here.
This is unacceptable, Zero. I will not accept it. We have to travel back in time and complain. At least we're not. But I like the movie. At least we're not covering fucking Hellbinders again.
Why? We already covered it. We're not going to cover it again.